Joining me now here in the studio, the Australian Financial Review political editor, Phil Coorey. I guess nothing wrong with doing this, but what will it find definitively and what can the government actually do about it are the other questions once you hold this sort of review?
Well, I guess it's like having the ACCC look at petrol prices, isn't it, to make sure that there's no dodgy behaviour going on, just to make that the exorbitant fees you're paying are warranted. It sort of doesn't make sense in the fact that the government's about to put $5.5 billion extra a year into childcare.
This will happen after the money goes in.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you're sort of starting from scratch, you'd probably do the review first before you tipped extra dough in. But the extra funding is part of an election promise, and as you know, there's a clamour for that to start sooner than later. So I guess practically they can't sort of wait.
It's kind of difficult to be definitive too around what is gouging. I mean, this is mainly a for-profit sector now.
Well, absolutely.
The not-for-profits to say, well, our rent went up, so we paid more. I mean, they're not-for-profit, and the for-profits. There's no law against making more profit. So
no, our childcare system's a terrible system, Tom, because it was never proper. If you're doing it from scratch, you would incorporate it into the public school system. At least give people a choice, so you could either go private or there'd be a low-cost option.
Yeah, if you wanted your whatever the private one, whether it was a niche or a different language one or whatever, send them there. Otherwise, here's your
whatever. And
near free option.
And the last person to propose that was Kim Beazley in 2006. Who was going to build childcare centres in 260 public schools and that sort of disappeared. That promise. Kevin Rudd took it to the 2007 election, but it never eventuated, and we're stuck with this system now of just private providers who do face enormous sort of real estate costs they have to pass on, and it's just subsidised. The more it's subsidised, the more it appears to cost. Yeah, so I guess the ACCC is trying to.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah, I think the horse is well and truly bolted.
We had a budget update yesterday. $50 billion better off.
Yep.
But it just sort of disappears into the ether because the issue still is this structural deficit, isn't it? And no one's really saying what to do about it. But we had the coalition on today, and Jane Hume was saying, low unemployment, this all helps, but that doesn't fix the structural deficit.
Look, all budgets have structural pressures, and structural pressures are, for the listeners, are costs that happen every year, and you can't, they're not optional, like Medicare.
If everything happens as expected in the budget, it's losing money each year. That's what the structural deficit is this year.
Pretty much. But I mean, look, if commodity prices stayed as they are for another 10 years, then you would be able to pay for this stuff. But what Jim Chalmers is saying, that big burst of money we got last year can't be relied upon to happen every year. So we need to be more foundational about it. But look, he's been saying this for a while, Tom. He said this in an interview with myself and my colleague John Keogh just after the election, that the budget starting 2023 is going to be part of a process building towards the next election, where they're going to have to take some pretty tough medicine to that election and seek a mandate for it in terms of tax increases and spending cuts.
A combination.
And look, and they're not saying what's in and what's out, but you'd have to start from, would they look at franking credits again, trusts, superannuation tax concessions, all those sorts of things are going to come back into play again. I wouldn't be surprised if someone mentions death taxes. All this stuff's going to be put on the table again in terms of, I think from a government's perspective, it's incumbent upon them not to just say, this stuff's costing heaps, we need to tax people more to pay for it. It's also incumbent on them to rein in the cost of some of these things, especially the NDIS, which is just ridiculous.
So rein in costs of what's going to happen to make sure we don't just throw endless money at defence,
after bad spending.
For example.
A lot of bad spending in defence too, And the NDIS is, we were told in the Gillard years that was going to cap out at $25 billion a year. Well, it's now going to cap out at $60 billion a year because the thing has been allowed to completely run off the rails and get well beyond what it was originally intended to do. So I think taxpayers are rightly aggrieved to say, well, hold on, mate, before you slug me more, I want to know you're doing your job. In terms of getting some of this stuff under control. It's not just a matter of chasing exorbitant spending. It's got to work at both ends. But that's where we're headed.
That'll be what the interesting thing about the next election. Presumably Labor will have to come up with. They're not going to get the budget, I think, back in the black. Beforehand.
Well, you never know. Another year like last year they could.
But sort of set to go out over those years. But by the next election they'll lay out a pathway for getting there. And that'll be their version.
Yes.
And then we'll get the coalitions. And that's what's interesting about this. How does Labor get there, and what's the fairest and best way versus the coalition? Because the coalition can say, how dare you do new taxes? If they're not going to touch taxes, they'll have to make a lot of cuts. as an alternative.
Yeah, or they'll go with like what Scott Morrison used to say and Josh Frydenberg. The coalition grows the economy. That's how they pay for things. It'll reawaken the old tax and spend versus the economic growth arguments. But look, don't forget, it was only a couple of years ago the budget was in balance. It's not inconceivable. It's more about. It's not just about raising revenue, it's about controlling costs as well. So,
and since then, tax receipts have recovered. Spending is still way higher than it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, as a proportion, exactly, as a proportion of GDP.
Yeah.
So, remember that the coalition had that deficit, that discipline where they wouldn't let taxes exceed 23.9% GDP. Labor's not committing to such a cap, as Chris Richardson said on the weekend in our paper, that the amount of money they're making out of company tax with the commodities boom, we're probably nudging that cap now. But so it'll those old classic lines of division between the coalition and Labor over the best way to pay for stuff, I think will sharpen over the next couple of years, and punters will have to make a choice in 2023 or 25. So.
Thank you.
Well done.